So, welcome to one of the first live lectures from my side in a while, and also welcome to the first lecture of 2026. Today, we're gonna talk about the end of the world, so a very, very uplifting topic, but I will try to make it as entertaining as possible, and it's not as boring, I hope, as it might be. Next week, we have Roland Menges talking about the economy for the common goods. Then they have another lecture from me. Then the cat farm people giving us another lecture, and then we are almost done with this semester's session. So first, some minor news updates, but I will also send out a std.ip message and an email to everyone who cannot use our std.ip, so that you are aware of the opportunity or the possibility to evaluate this course, either by clicking on that button or scanning the QR code, or just waiting for the std.ip/email message that we will distribute. And of course, we're always extremely happy if we get good reviews, but from a practical perspective, we are of course also very much interested in any criticism of this course. What did you like? What did you not like? And especially why you might not like certain aspects of the course. How would you like that we do it differently? We're experimenting very, very much in this course. I think we're doing this now for the fourth time, maybe even the fifth time. And we have changed something drastically more or less every semester. This semester, we are heavily relying on invited lectures. I think we never had so many invited lectures for particular topics. Back in the days, I tried to cover some of them myself, or Anand covered some, but it's always slightly more convenient and convincing if an actual expert on a particular topic is explaining something to you instead of us trying to wing it ourselves. So let us know if you liked it or not. Please also let us know what you like about this course, if there is anything, because if we don't know that you like it, we might just change it and thereby making this course worse. So if there is something that you like and that you don't like, please leave us feedback and also leave us some suggestions how we could change particular pain points. I'll probably bring it up next week again, and then the week after. I don't know from the top of my head how long the evaluation period is, but please do it as soon as possible and do not procrastinate it too much. At some point, the evaluation period closes, and then you can only leave us direct feedback. Of course, feedback is anonymized, or at least pseudonymized, so we don't know what you're saying. So yeah, let us know what you think. That's about it with respect to news and updates, which then leads us to the topic of today, which is, on one hand, complex societies and technology, but also what happens when complex societies that are heavily relying on complex technology start to fail for one reason or another. And particularly for those who are from Germany, who might also watch this video, like other people on YouTube who might not be from here, there was, on one hand, an upcoming event that leaves the impression that the world is dying, because for everyone who did not notice, tomorrow everything in Goslar is cancelled due to the very bad weather predictions. So if you haven't heard yet, and if you consider coming to Goslar tomorrow, please don't do so. Everything will be closed here, and please don't put yourself in danger due to the weather restrictions. Something that just happened very recently in the past also showed or illustrated that some of our reliance on very vulnerable infrastructure is something that we take for granted, but if it fails, can make our life quite miserable. There was a rather long-lasting and big power outage in a district of Berlin, a part of the electric grid, like one of those connection hubs, I don't know the perfect English term for that, caught fire or was damaged by a fire, and if I'm not mistaken, it cut off the power supply to something like 40,000 people, and not just like for a few hours, but actually for various days. I think they just got the power up and running again yesterday. So it was quite a long time. And a lot of people noticed that it's quite inconvenient to be without power, because without power, a lot of the things that you take for granted don't really work, down to most heating systems that rely on some kind of electricity in one way or another, or are totally powered by electricity as the main source of generating heat. But everything else, including lights, of course, Wi-Fi, even the phone network went down in those parts. So there was essentially nothing working anymore, just because of one small fire that cut off the power to that particular district. Of course, that does not really constitute a collapse of a society of our system, but it was something that illustrates the dependency on quite complex technological networks that we have, and where just one failure can have quite drastic implications for our daily life that we do not foresee or that we do not expect to happen to us in a very rich and well-off country. You have seen this figure in one of the MOOC videos before, where we introduced the World 3 model, and I think I used this figure or this illustration, this image, to emphasize that one of the main problems that we as a society have can even be explained to very small children. Essentially, we only have one Earth, but we're fucking it up. Point that I made there, you can explain that very simple to children, that if you have one sandbox and you're throwing out the sand left and right and putting it full of trash, then there is not much of your sandbox left anymore, or even if it's still there, it's not a place that you enjoy very much or that you could even call livable. Despite the simplicity of this problem, and that you can explain it very, very well to probably a 5 or 6 year old, most people, or a majority of people, still seem to struggle with this concept and treat our planet and our our ecological systems as if we would have a replacement for them, and if we do not have to take any steps to protect it in various ways so that we can still live on this planet. We also briefly talked about those so-called Lotka-Volterra equations, sometimes also known as predator-prey equations. Very, very simple dynamics, and an extremely simple example. You have two populations over time, where blue indicates the amount of foxes that you have in a certain ecosystem, and red the amount of rabbits that you have in a certain ecosystem. And those two populations in this extremely simple scenario do somehow influence each other. Usually, foxes have a tendency to hunt rabbits, so we start with a rather high rabbit count, which makes it very nice for foxes in terms of hunting and having a very good life. Since the foxes are doing well, the fox population increases. The more foxes I have, the more rabbits they eat. Therefore, at some point, the rabbit population starts to decline and the fox population goes through the roof. At some point, the foxes notice that they do not have any food left and their population collapses or declines heavily, which then in turn gives the rabbits an opportunity to recoup, assuming that some rabbits, like at least one female and one male rabbit, have been left alive, and the population increases again, and then the same cycle starts all over again. So there is a pattern of ups and downs, and if one population, or especially the fox population, reaches its peaks and has no resources left, it collapses to a much, much lower level as they had on their peak. And if the resources can be reestablished or regenerated, then there is a chance of a population increasing again. We can build, yes, you could say, like the new fox empire. And this is a little bit this dynamic what we're going to talk about, and what we also have talked about in the past, because this is essentially like one of the like you can draw a straight line from this very simple Lotka-Volterra equations to some of the messages that the World 3 model that we discussed earlier in the MOOC lectures essentially outlines. So we discussed various scenarios in this World 3 model, the standard run, or also called the business as usual 2 scenario, is the one that is most similar to our current situation. In this model, we were looking at the time frame from 1900 until the end of the 21st century. And we start with a huge amount of resources, a decent population, decent industrial output, a decent population, and also a decent amount of food. Over time, especially thanks to heavy industrialization, growth in population, and so on, those graphs go very much up, except for our resource graph, because the more people we are, the higher our living standard, the more resources we consume. And since we are living in a finite system, we do not have an infinite supply of most resources. So overall, they go down. Population goes up, industrial output goes up until a certain point, food surplus goes up, but a indiscriminate point in time that we cannot quite really state, because the World 3 model is not quite time sensitive, so it does not predict a particular point where stuff goes south, but more like a rough time frame. You can see that the more resources we consume, the higher our industrial output, the pollution goes through the roof, and pollution here also incorporates climate change. And then suddenly population, industrial output, and food availability drop heavily until they plateau on a certain point after the 21st century. We discussed all the pros and cons of the World 3 model, so I'm not going to go back to that. We have a whole lecture on that. The main point being, in a finite system, you cannot grow indefinitely, you cannot use an indefinite amount of resources without having to face some of those consequences that we listed here. When this is going to happen, if it's already happening for some people or in parts of the world, or even for all of us, it's like an open debate, even though it's like there are various pointers. But we're not going to bother too much today when this is going to happen and whether it's going to happen, but more like, okay, how would you notice that something like this happens, and what the consequences would be, and how to adapt to those collapse or decline symptoms that we might be facing. Another thing that is somehow closely related to this aspect is also something that we discussed in this MOOC lecture. It was Forrester's dilemma. One can forecast future conditions in the region where action is not effective. So it's very simple for me to predict what is happening in 2 seconds from now. I'm probably still going to be talking, and yes, I was correct. So you can predict something that is very close in the future very easily, but your actions on that in terms of long-term impact are not really effective. And one can have influence in the region where forecasting is not reliable. So I can make the decision to never drive a single kilometer in my car anymore, or become a vegetarian, vegan, stop heating my house, something like that. It does not have an immediate impact in the next 2 seconds, but it will probably have an impact in a larger setting, but it's very difficult to make proper predictions the further I go into the future. And predicting or thinking about the consequences of our actions in the future and also in the past is not something that humans are particularly good at. For whatever reason, and I'm not going to make any claims why that might be so, because I'm not a sociologist, psychologist, anthropologist, whatever. People don't, but there's like a tendency that we have difficulties with long-term planning and long-term thinking and long-term strategies for our better good. I would rather, like a lot of people would rather enjoy something right now instead of making sure that they can also enjoy something in the long-term future. Humans, for whatever reason, have a tendency to prefer short-term gains over long-term living standards, for example. And they also have a tendency to assume that things will stay as they are no matter what happens, because this is what we are used to. Why should it get worse? Theoretically, and especially to all the new technology like AI and so forth, our lives will become much better. It will be more comfortable. But this is not necessarily the case, and we're not necessarily the first society or civilization that has reached a certain level of comfort, a certain level of complexity of its society, and a certain level of advancement that we expect to continue indefinitely. And as you can see, for example, just in this small chart here, there have been various civilizations. You can also call them empires, societies, whatever you like, in the past that have risen to the top of the food chain in terms of civilizations existing at that point, governed huge parts of this planet, extracted and used various types of resources, and have been extremely powerful, but for whatever reason, they are still not around anymore. So the ancient Egypts are probably not the most powerful society or civilization at the moment anymore. Also the classical Greeks or the Roman empires. They have been there, they have been extremely successful, they have governed huge parts of the world, but for whatever reason, they are not there anymore. And this idea that the living standard that we have right now, the world order that we have right now, the nice living standard that we have, and all the nice amendments that we have are not a written rule that they will always be there, but that there is a risk, especially given all the challenges that we discussed before in this lecture. Those is what we often ignore. And today's lecture is essentially trying to understand a little bit better where in a certain point of history we might be and what potential causes and pointers could be to get an idea where in this time span of an empire, of a civilization we might be and what type of consequences there are. So I'm essentially not saying just because societies might face a challenging future that this will be the end of all humanity, because societies have failed before. There's a good chance that there will be another society afterwards, but we also reach a certain peak in our society, which then begs the question, is this the peak, and is it only going south from here for various reasons that we'll discuss later, or not, and what are the actionable consequences from that could be relevant for future plannings? Because this whole course is essentially about how do we face the challenges of the 21st century and all of their different implications, what could be different building blocks, and then in order to understand what useful building blocks are, this whole session, I hope, makes a contribution to figuring out, okay, what could be relevant to look into. Different illustration, but very similar content here. This was, or this illustrates slightly better, sorry, also the different impacts and sizes of different empires over time. I'm also just noticing I don't have slides behind me, but that's okay because no one is here. Because different empires over time also had different sizes compared to each other. For example, the Mongol Empire and the British Empire being much, much bigger than what, for example, the Persian Empire had before. But it conveys pretty much the same message, that empires or civilizations or societies of varying types of complexity and varying power and varying landmass control have been there before, have achieved great things, but still are not around anymore. Which leads us to the first thought exercise before we're going into further theoretical background, but I do not want to poison your minds or taint your minds before we go any further. That's also why I haven't uploaded the slides yet. And would like to ask Anand and or Chintan to break you down into smaller online groups and ponder the question of what or what if we assume that our society is collapsing or will be collapsing at some point in the near future, what would it gonna be looking like for you on a very personal level? You are all now students at a university. You have to do homeworks, you have to attend lectures, you might have to write a thesis, a seminar report, the exams are knocking on your door. Maybe you have some obligations at home, you might have to move somewhere, you have a girlfriend, a boyfriend. You have all of your normal life, which includes cleaning your clothes and going to a supermarket. In all of this, in all of your daily life, enjoying all the nice things that you might have and enjoy, how would you notice that a society, a civilization that you are a part of is showing the first sign of collapse, and what would you say is the most likely scenario of such a collapse happening? You can, like, collapse is a really hard word, but I'm using this to make the point that it's not about, oh, we might have less olive oil, or the olive oil prices are going up, or the coffee prices are going up, and this is really inconvenient. So I'm really more thinking about extreme impacts on a society. What examples you use and what you think, how something like that would start, and what the causes of this were, and what the implications are. Like, I'm just very, very curious to see what you think this could look like and what you deem to be the most likely scenario for that. And even though we're going to break it down into different groups, that doesn't mean that all of you have, like within the group, that you have to map out the same things. You can also, as a group, just present a brief overview where you say, okay, look, we had 4 people in our group. 2 of them thought it's going to be this, but we also discussed the point of view from X and Y, that it might be this, and we could imagine that this leads to this, and so on and so on, and this is a long game. So just because you're in one group doesn't mean that you have to only have one opinion. So 20 minutes from now, I would suggest we do the breakout timer for 22 minutes so that you all have a little bit of time to get in there, get back out of this, and we meet again at 2:50 p.m. And of course, after getting a coffee, I will be here as well to answer any questions and help out. Anand Chintan also being there. But before we move on, I will cut the recording for now. We'll see you in the second part.